It's funny because you were hitting 1987 and I'll hit 1997, so eventually we'll get up to 2007 here along the journey. The first thing to maybe characterize is that at that point in time, we'd been establishing for a couple of years a work stream about how to behave in the future and how to become a more global company. The revenues had continued to grow outside the United States at rates that were often faster than the United States. We knew that our future was to become a truly global company. So Jerry was one of the ones that started a work stream against that we called Future Vision, which was to establish what the new way of operating would be in that future state. And it was a great body of work that I had no idea I was going to collide into. And I think I know a few folks here. Steve Bench, for instance, was part of that journey in those events. Chad might have been as well. So, for me, what happened was that we understood that this was a very important work to try to become more global. At that particular point for me, I was in a very different place. I was in one of those team places that Steve talked about. I was heading up our basketball business. I was loving heading up our basketball business. We had a phenomenal team. We worked extremely well together. We were having a lot of success. The energy level of the team was high. And the consequence of that for me was that I had blinders on. I mean, I walked in every day and I was on that mission and I was on that journey of serving basketball athletes and creating great experiences for them and building the brand through those experiences. I was not looking much outside of that realm. And in the summer of '96, I went off on sabbatical, came back, and Mark Parker asked me to do a new job. And the new job sounded very compelling to me. I was going to be the head of product marketing, I thought, for Nike. That was the job that Bob Wood held at the time, who I was reporting to. And he said, I want you to move up into Bob's job, and we think that'll be great for you. And I'm like, boy, this is going to be tough because the team that we've had in basketball will die. It's going to change, and so we had to say our goodbyes to each other. But I felt as service to Nike, and it was a great promotional opportunity. I'd do that. Then I had my first meeting in my new job, and then I realized that it was not the same job. It was a very different job, and it had very different requirements. It was a job about product management. I'd never heard about product management. I'd only known product marketing, the idea of building stories and figuring out how to communicate those stories through our products and our communications. This was a shift. This was part of what I learned more deeply was Future Vision 1, that we needed to start to separate the disciplines around product management from marketing. And marketing was going to become more of a global, more of a regional and local execution, and we were going to focus just on product. So that was a surprise to me. And then the next thing I learned, not too much from the distant future there, was that we also needed to change our processes to do that. We need to really think about our go-to-market processes in a very different way and hit gates and dates and things of this magnitude. Not really my strong suit, to be really honest with you. I'm not necessarily a process-oriented person. And I struggle with these things because generally, in our little hoop world, we were happy with the way we did things, and we kind of just churned stuff out, and people liked it, and we didn't need all this global inclusion. We weren't sure whether there was going to be great results to this, and how many people in a room to decide to, so I was in a very strange place, and I was pretty determined that I could do a pretty good job of making sure everybody saw things right, and we could correct all this, We'd make sure that product marketing still existed, and we'd make sure that the integrity of small groups to create products and not have to go through any dates and gates would all hold through. And so I started in a drive on this thing that was actually counterproductive to Nike. I was pretty closed-minded about it. Didn't realize how closed-minded I was, but first the senior leader started to remind me I was pretty closed-minded about it, and I didn't stick. It just, it kind of hurt me a little bit, hurt my feelings, and I thought, well, what's going on with that? And then when I started realizing that fundamentally, the folks that were working for me at that time, I'd created a great bond there. That was the one piece of traction that I'd gained at that point. And we had really great communications with each other. But not only were the senior leaders not tracking, the peers weren't tracking. And at that point, these guys were peers of mine. And I was, I was digging myself into a really, really deep hole, kind of up there. There's no up arrow in that trough happening at that time. And, so how do you pull yourself out? And how do you help to get to a different place? And for me to simplify the journey from here and what it's meant to me, obviously, over time is that, I had to start to listen. I had to start to reach out and create those dialogues with people. I had to get to a much deeper understanding as to what we were really trying to accomplish and how people felt about it. And so, you know, I had to open up. And so, you know, Jerry, I think, was one of the most important people in that journey for me, because he was the one that was sitting there looking me in the eye and was the one person being directly honest with me about the change that was required. And he helped a great deal at that time. And, you know, first couple of times I didn't really listen. Then I started listening after a while.
That'd be 3.
It was 3 times, yeah. It was on the 3rd strike, okay. But it was remarkable for me, because I just stepped away from it. And I remember that the next, I was at Thanksgiving time about, about 4 or 5 months into this journey and this kind of bad experience. And I just stepped away and I read a book about yoga. And it was the weirdest darn thing, but I read a book about yoga. It wasn't about poses, it was about the philosophy of it. And it was all about openness, and it was all about connectedness. And I just started to practice that. And then I started to bring that into the workflow. And then I started to really understand. And then as we got through it, I could be a good leader in terms of serving the organization into these changes and start to help be a good partner to the other teammates that I had in terms of driving these changes and making these things happen. And it took about 3 years, and I think by the time I left that journey in 2000, we'd gotten it to a pretty good place. So that would be my journey on that one.
Could I add just one, I mean, it's just really to underscore something I think Peter's saying, is I think such a good example. It's so easy, particularly when you're getting difficulty, to think that you got to have the answer how to get out. And one of the things I'm really hearing in your story, Peter, is even though you were in a position of responsibility, you really didn't have the answers, and maybe you were part of things being difficult, in fact. And yet, once you could kind of come to terms with that, and to me, it's almost always comes down, you got to have somebody you can talk to and who can kind of give it to you straight.
Yes.
The way, you know, eventually Jerry was able to get through. But, you know, it's so often, particularly when we get stuck, we think that somehow I've got to get us out of here.
Right.
As opposed to, no, I've got to kind of tell the truth of where I'm really at.
Right.
I may be as much a part of being stuck as getting us out. And as soon as you can do that, then you can start to really contribute something.
Right, and my default in those situations is to go harder at it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I actually tend to work against myself, and that was the, you know, when I could just see that it wasn't working, it was, you know, the evidence was so profound, it was like, I got to stop what I'm doing.
If I might add, one of the things that's interesting about Peter's story there is that during that time, you had a number of leaders who didn't necessarily believe in the change, and they weren't particularly blocking, but they weren't particularly enabling and so forth.
I left that out.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, okay. And, you know, a lot of companies just sort of classify those people as stragglers. And in my favorite term, you shoot stragglers, right? Because they just hold everybody back, right? But the reality is that people are wounded, right? They either don't understand, or they need different skill sets, or they need time to adapt. And it is absolutely essential in fundamental change in companies that you carry the wounded, that you find those people, because they become the leaders who actually drive the change. They may not be the early adopters. They may be problems at times. Peter wasn't particularly that, but some companies just say, we dictate something from the top and it will happen, and everybody get out of the way. And the reality is, and especially at Nike, is nothing changes at Nike from a dictate from the top. It changes from adoption through the bottom and the working organizations, the informal groups in the company. And as Peter moved to driving those organizations and those types of things, he became probably the most dominant leader in driving that change. And so just if you run into that, and you've got folks that, you know, you said where you want to go, but they aren't quite there, anger doesn't necessarily get that done. But working at it and persistence and being persuasive does. And then it's much more powerful.
Yeah, I think one of the big keys in that too was the effectiveness of working into small groups and working into dialogue. and especially working several levels in at a personal level into the organization when we got there was really a fundamental part of this, and allow people to be transparent and get their feelings out, get their thoughts out, feel included and feeling like they had a voice in this thing, and then helping them to come to the same conclusion that we needed in terms of moving forward. But it was very powerful to us that it was really in the more middle level of our organization at that time that we got the power we needed to be able to make the changes and have people embrace it.